Hello, dear listeners. Welcome to the Think and Be Better Inner Journeys podcast. In the hustle and bustle of life, how often do you take time for yourself? How often do you truly listen to your inner voice? This podcast is all about exploring those very questions. Megan and Chris are here in every episode to guide you through personal growth, mindfulness, and inner transformation. Sometimes deep, sometimes playful, but always heartfelt conversations that will touch your everyday life and maybe even prompt you to rethink some of your habits. Are you ready to think, to talk, and to become better alongside Megan and Chris, who can't wait to accompany you on your own inner journey? Then get ready. Think and Be Better Inner Journeys starts now.
Hey there, everyone! Welcome to the very first episode of Think and Be Better Inner Journeys. I'm Megan, and I'm honestly a little nervous, but mostly excited to be starting this podcast journey with all of you.
I'm Chris. I'm totally pumped about this first episode. We've been planning this for what feels like forever. Right, Megan?
Oh my gosh, yes. Months of talking about it, and here we are, finally doing it. I guess that ties perfectly into our topic today, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. We're diving into something that hits really close to home for both of us. The fear of failure and why we hesitate to start new things, like this podcast, for example.
Exactly. There were definitely moments when I thought, what if nobody listens? Or what if I sound ridiculous? Those little voices of doubt that try to hold us back.
I had those exact same thoughts, and that's precisely why we wanted to kick off Think and Be Better with this topic. Because everyone deals with this, right? That paralyzing fear that keeps us from trying new things or pursuing our passions.
And we figured, what better way to face our own fears than by talking about them on our first episode? So here we are, pushing through the discomfort and hoping you'll join us on this journey. So, Chris, let's dig deeper into this. What exactly is this fear of failure thing? I mean, I know how it feels, but I'm curious about what's actually happening in our brains when we experience it.
That's a great question, Megan. Fear of failure is basically this intense worry about not meeting expectations or not achieving desired outcomes. It's that nagging feeling, that little voice saying, "Don't even try because you might mess up."
Oh, I know that voice all too well, especially when starting this podcast.
Exactly. And it affects so many people because our brains are actually wired to avoid pain and discomfort. From an evolutionary perspective, failure meant potential danger. So our minds are trying to protect us, even though the stakes aren't usually life or death anymore.
That's fascinating. So it's almost like our brain is stuck in cave person mode sometimes.
In a way, yes. It's this primitive response that hasn't quite caught up with modern life. And psychologically speaking, fear of failure connects deeply to our sense of self-worth. We tend to equate what we do with who we are.
I've definitely felt that before. Like, if I fail at something, it means I am a failure. Not just that I attempted something challenging.
Absolutely. And that's where it gets really tricky. This shows up in everyday life all the time. Like when someone puts off starting a business they're passionate about, or doesn't apply for a promotion they deserve. Or even smaller things like not trying a new recipe because it might not turn out perfect.
Or not starting a podcast for months, even though you've bought all the equipment.
Exactly. And what's really interesting is how it manifests differently for different people. Some become perfectionists, obsessing over every detail to avoid any possibility of failure. Others procrastinate endlessly, and some just completely avoid situations where they might fail.
So basically, we're all walking around with these invisible barriers we've created for ourselves.
That's a perfect way to put it, Megan. And the most challenging part is that these barriers feel so real, even though they're largely constructed in our minds based on past experiences or even imagined future scenarios that might never happen.
So, speaking of barriers, I'm really curious about how we can actually identify when fear of failure is holding us back. What are some common signs that people might recognize in themselves? You know, Chris, we're sitting here talking about fear of failure, and I can't help but think about this exact moment right now. I mean, this is officially our first episode of Think and Be Better Inner Journeys, and I was absolutely terrified to start.
Oh my goodness, yes! I remember when you first texted me about doing this podcast together. I was so excited but also completely paralyzed with fear. I think I waited, 3 days before responding to you?
3 days? It felt like 3 weeks. I was convinced you hated the idea.
Not at all. I was just overthinking every possible way this could go wrong. Like, what if nobody listens? What if our content isn't valuable enough? What if I sound ridiculous? All those thoughts were swirling around.
Oh, I had the exact same fears. And then there was the technical stuff. I spent weeks researching microphones and editing software instead of actually recording anything. Classic procrastination, right?
Absolutely classic. And for me, this isn't even the first time. I remember when I wanted to start teaching yoga last year. I kept telling myself I needed just one more certification, one more workshop, just a little bit more knowledge before I could possibly begin.
How long did that delay you?
Almost a year. A whole year of not doing something I really wanted to do because I was terrified of not being the perfect yoga instructor right from day one.
I've done similar things with my writing. I have this novel that's been almost ready to share for about 3 years now. Every time someone asks to read it, my stomach just drops. It's this intense feeling of exposure, I guess, like I'm about to be judged.
That's exactly it. There's this vulnerability in putting yourself out there. I think what's really happening is that we connect our output with our value as people. Like if the podcast fails, then somehow we are failures.
That's so true. And the funny thing is, now that we've actually started recording, those fears seem not smaller exactly, but more manageable. They're still there in the background.
They absolutely are. I still feel nervous, but there's also this excitement that's stronger than the fear. And honestly, just acknowledging that we're both feeling this way makes it easier to push through it.
So how do we actually get past this fear, Chris? Is there a way to reframe how we think about failure?
That's exactly it, Megan. The key is completely shifting our perspective on what failure actually is. We've been conditioned to see failure as this terrible endpoint, but really, it's just part of the learning process.
So instead of seeing failure as the opposite of success,
We need to see it as a stepping stone to success. Think about it. Every single successful person has failed countless times. The difference is they didn't let those failures define them or stop them.
I love that. On Think and Be Better, Inner Journeys, we're all about those perspective shifts. What are some practical ways people can start reframing failure?
Well, first, I think we need to change our language around it. Instead of saying, I failed, try saying, I learned. Like when we mess up something in this podcast, we're not failing at podcasting. We're learning how to be better podcasters.
Oh, that's a subtle but powerful shift. So it's about the narrative we tell ourselves?
Exactly. Our brains are storytelling machines. Another technique is to practice what psychologists call cognitive reframing, basically taking a negative thought and intentionally viewing it through a more constructive lens.
Can you give an example of that?
Sure. So instead of thinking, if I apply for this job and don't get it, I'll be devastated, you reframe it as, if I apply for this job and don't get it, I'll gain interview experience and feedback for next time. It's the same situation but with a completely different emotional impact.
I can see how that would help with the anxiety beforehand, too.
Absolutely. Another powerful mindset shift is adopting a growth mindset, which was popularized by Carol Dweck. It's this idea that our abilities aren't fixed. They can be developed through dedication and hard work.
So instead of thinking, I'm not good at this, you'd think,
I'm not good at this. Yet. That little word makes all the difference. It acknowledges where you are now while leaving room for growth and improvement.
these are fantastic techniques, Chris. I'm definitely going to try that language shift. I've caught myself saying I failed at so many things.
One last thing that really helps me is remembering that discomfort is where growth happens. If you're always comfortable, you're probably not learning or expanding. Those butterflies in your stomach? That's just a sign you're doing something meaningful.
That's such a beautiful way to look at it. So those nervous feelings we had before starting this podcast were actually good signs.
Exactly. They were telling us we care about this project. And now look at us. We're doing it despite the fear.
Now, let's get practical, Chris. What specific actions can people take to actually push through this fear of failure? I mean, the mindset shifts are great, but how do we take that first step?
That's really the hardest part, isn't it? The first step I always recommend is to break things down into absolutely tiny steps. And I mean really small.
How small are we talking?
So small that it would feel silly not to do it. If you want to write a book, don't start with write chapter 1. Start with write one sentence. If you're afraid of public speaking, don't commit to a TED Talk. Just record yourself talking for 30 seconds.
I love that approach. It's like tricking your brain into not activating that fear response.
Exactly. The second actionable step is to create what I call a failure-friendly environment. This means surrounding yourself with people who understand that failure is part of the process and who won't judge you for it.
So basically finding your cheerleaders?
Yes, but also mentors who can give you constructive feedback. When we decided to start Think and Be Better, Inner Journeys, remember how we reached out to other podcasters first? Their advice made this feel less scary.
Oh my gosh, yes! Having those conversations definitely helped calm my nerves. What else can people do?
Another powerful technique is tracking and celebrating your attempts, not just your successes. Most people only celebrate when they hit their goal, but there's so much value in acknowledging every time you try.
So, I should celebrate the fact that I showed up today for our first episode, regardless of how it turns out?
Absolutely. Set up a system where you track your efforts. Maybe it's a journal entry, or stars on a calendar, or telling a friend. The point is to recognize that the attempt itself is a win.
That reminds me of something I read about how we should praise kids for their effort rather than their natural abilities.
Yes, that's the growth mindset in action. And here's something else that's really practical. Create a failure resume where you actually document your failures and what you learned from them.
A failure resume? That sounds counterintuitive but fascinating.
It's incredibly powerful because it shows you how resilient you actually are. Looking back at my own failure resume, I can see that what felt catastrophic in the moment often led to unexpected opportunities.
These are such tangible steps people can take. Any final advice for our listeners who might be paralyzed by fear right now?
Remember that discomfort is temporary, but regret can last forever. Ask yourself, what's the worst that could happen? And then, could I handle that? The answer is almost always yes. We're much more resilient than we give ourselves credit for.
Well, Chris, we've covered so much ground today about fear of failure. I think if I had to summarize what we've talked about, it's that failure isn't this terrible monster we make it out to be.
Right. I think the biggest takeaway is that reframing our relationship with failure completely changes how we approach new challenges. It's not about never failing. It's about seeing failure as feedback rather than a reflection of our worth.
I love that. And using those small steps to build momentum instead of trying to take these giant leaps that terrify us.
Exactly. And remember, everyone listening, tracking your attempts, not just your successes, creates this visible record of your courage. That's what really matters.
You know, it feels appropriate that our first episode of Think and Be Better, Inner Journeys, was about overcoming the fear of starting something new, since we just did exactly that with this podcast.
It feels very meta, doesn't it? We're living what we're preaching. And I have to say, despite all the nerves, I'm so glad we took this leap together.
Me too. And to everyone who tuned in for our very first episode, thank you so much. We're just getting started on this journey, and we'd love for you to join us.
In upcoming episodes, we'll be exploring topics like building meaningful habits, managing overwhelm, and finding purpose in everyday life. All those inner journeys that help us grow.
So please follow, subscribe, or however you keep track of your favorite podcasts. And remember, the simple act of starting something new like we did with this podcast, that's already a win.
Absolutely. Until next time, keep thinking and be better.